who's not sorry when snowflakes can't handle the truth. It's your host, David Knight.
Welcome back. I'm David Knight on this Monday, October the 23rd, 2017. Again, if you want to call in and talk about those three subjects, either the Vegas shooting, the Mueller special prosecution, which we're going to go into detail in the next segment. There's not enough time to get very far in that. This is a short segment here at the top of the hour, but we're going to talk about what has been learned about Robert Mueller, about his past investigations, about the character of that. And we've said for a very long time, this is a Stalin-esque investigation. This is a bring me the man, I'll find the crime. And all too often, that has been the case with special prosecutors. But one individual wrote an op-ed piece over the weekend that laid out some of his previous experiences with Robert Mueller. And of course, we've had a series. I think we've got the third article yet, but we had two articles from Dr. Jerome Corsi talking about prosecutorial misconduct by the people around Mueller. We're going to tell you about prosecutorial misconduct by Mueller himself coming up. And so that subject, the Vegas shooting, also the back and forth between Frederica Wilson and President Trump and White House Chief of Staff Kelly, this back and forth about the Gold Star controversy. So if you want to join us on any of those three topics, we'll be welcoming your call. The number is 888-201-2244. Just real quickly, at the top of the hour here, some news items. It's kind of interesting that, as Breitbart points out, gun control push has floundered as views on guns remain unchanged after the Las Vegas attack. And of course, these attacks have never in the past changed the public's minds about gun control. As a matter of fact, typically what they do is they have people, if they're really concerned that there's going to be some gun control legislation, they will go purchase guns because they're afraid that they're going to be confiscated. So they'll purchase them hoping that they're going to have them grandfathered in. But the interesting thing about this particular round is that although we've had the Democrats come out with 9 different proposals from various individuals, we've had Chuck Schumer really try to tamp that down within the Democrat Party, telling them, no, we do not want to get onto gun control. They're starting to realize that's a losing battle. And I think they're also starting to realize that this narrative that we're seeing coming out of Las Vegas stinks to the high heavens. It's one of the most one of the narratives full of holes that I've never seen anything so patently ridiculous as this particular investigation and the narrative that we're sold from day one. And of course, the efforts to cover it up. So it's kind of a non-starter for them. So Chuck Schumer has said, let's not push hard on this, and has really kind of backed off and said, let's go for the economic issues. Let's go hard into socialism. Let's go back to our core issues. Of saying that we need free stuff from government. And of course, Bernie Sanders is out there saying, hey, yeah, it's going to cost you more in taxes, but you're going to get a lot of free stuff. So that's I guess we should say that is a welcome development to some degree. Also, we're seeing here another article from Breitbart. Mexico is butting into the fight against Texas's sanctuary city ban. The government of Mexico is now filing amicus briefs in these various lawsuits. And of course, here in Austin, we have seen the Mexican consulate put up signs directing people of how to get there, trying to help people to violate our immigration laws. As soon as the talk about the dreamer status began, the signs came up. And this is something that should really, I think, make you very angry at how a foreign government is interfering in this, manipulating this situation. Why? Because they do not want to pay for the education of their own children. For one, they would like to send them here, but they would also like to have the money that comes back in terms of welfare, in terms of checks that people send back to Mexico from the jobs that they have here, taking jobs of young Americans in most cases at the bottom of the pay scale. That's why our kids don't develop a work ethic, because they can't find a job anymore. And real quickly, I think this is an interesting development. We've had Melania Trump cut the bloated payroll from Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama had 16 people. Melania has 4. So she's cut the staff by 75%. She's cut the payroll by over 60%. That's making America great. That's one way to drain the swamp. Get them out of your staff. Reform begins at home. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. Welcome back on this Monday, October the 23rd, 2017. I'm David Knight, and we have some callers who've queued up here. And I said that we'll take calls on the Vegas shooting, on the special prosecution. Very special very special prosecution, personalized prosecution by Robert Mueller and his staff. We'll take calls on that as well. Also on the back and forth between Congresswoman Frederica Wilson with the cowboy hat. So if you want to call in and talk about the three of those. Now, I want to, before we go to our callers, I want them to hang on for just a little bit because I want to talk a little bit about Robert Mueller and some of the information that came out over the weekend. What is behind this Russian collusion investigation? It's been going on for a long time, and I think we're now starting to see the evidence that what I and many of us here at Infowars have been saying for a long time, that this whole thing was, there were two parts of it. Number one, it was a distraction. Let's get you focused on the messenger and not the message. You know, over the weekend, we had Jimmy Carter say that he and his wife had voted for Hillary Clinton. They had the big event, a big fundraiser charity event. All five presidents were there, former presidents were there. And one of the interesting things that he said was, he said, yeah, I don't think there's anything to this Russian thing at all. And they also said, we voted for Bernie Sanders. And they both agreed with that. His wife said, no, I think all that Russian stuff that's real. You know, we know that's real. Intelligence services have told us that. Well, that's politicized as well. That's the other part of that. But he didn't believe that that it was real. And so as we look at this developing, and they continue with this narrative, we understand that they did not want people to look at the information that came out about the DNC that was leaked by a whistleblower. It wasn't hacked. And we've had numerous examples of evidence to show that it was, indicate that, as well as testimony from people that we trust. Not anonymous sources for the Washington Post or the New York Times, but people that we trust who have not lied to us, that are affiliated with WikiLeaks. Julian Assange says it was not a state actor. We had a former UK ambassador who said, I went to the U.S. and picked it up with a thumb drive from a whistleblower. And then we looked at the files and the time that was there, and no one less than William Binney, who was the former technical head of the NSA, looked at that data and said, no, it would not have been transferred in that amount of time over the internet. It would have had to have been copied to a thumb drive. So we have all that information there, but they had the purpose of distracting you away from what was said about Hillary Clinton and focusing on who did it, who released this information. And, of course, making it about the Russians. And then they doubled down on this Russian narrative to cover up their crimes and their collusion with the Russians. And, of course, at the very center of this is Robert Mueller himself. But then you have also the never-Trumpers like Lindsey Graham. And here's what he had to say over the weekend.
All right, before I let you go, you've come on this show numerous times and said Russia needs to be punished. You passed a tough sanctions bill. You passed it in July. The president signed it in early August.
Right.
There was a deadline of October 1st. It is not October 1st. It is October 20th, and the sanctions have not been implemented. Why?
I think the Trump administration is slow when it comes to Russia. They have a blind spot on Russia I still can't figure out, but I can tell you what happened in 16.
Can you? Is that
a blind spot because he's part of the military-industrial complex.
All I can say is that wherever the Russia investigation takes us, it will take us. In 16, they interfered in our elections. I don't think they affected the outcome, but in 18 and 20, they're coming back against us. What are the rules of engagement? Did what they do in 2016, did that amount to an act of war? How do you respond to cyber threats? We're really not well together as a nation in terms of the threats we're facing from the cyber arena.
Right.
But Russia's going to get worse, if not better. Mr. President, go after Russia because they're coming after us.
But how are you going to hold him accountable if he doesn't implement these sanctions?
The Congress will have a way to hold the president accountable. I think he's beginning to understand the threats we face better and better each day.
Okay, so that's the Republican narrative, and that's Mr. Military Industrial Complex, Lindsey Graham. And he would like to ramp up our cyber industrial complex, if you will. He wants to ramp up that part of it. He wants to make sure that we have a Cold War that is going, because that's going to make money for the rest of the military industrial complex. So the Republicans are selling it on that side. And, of course, some of them may have some exposure on this corruption that is now beginning to come out as well in terms of documents. And, again, it is not new in a sense. We knew about Uranium One. We knew about the $500,000 that was paid to Bill Clinton. But the details are what are new, just as we got the details from Snowden, and it made a big difference in the public's understanding of this. And, of course, over the weekend, we saw Jimmy Carter say, well, the Russians didn't alter the election, Obama didn't deliver, and we didn't vote for Hillary. The Daily Wire sums it up. So they said, did the Russians purloin the election from Hillary? And he says, I don't think there's any evidence This is Jimmy Carter. I don't think there's any evidence that what the Russians did changed enough votes or any votes. And his wife, Rosalind, said, well, they obviously did. And he said, well, we have a difference of opinion on that. And then said during the primary, they did not vote for Hillary. They voted for Sanders. He felt that Obama had come into office delivering hope and change to the country. He left the country far more split by partisan politics. He said he made some very wonderful statements, in my opinion, when he first got into office. Then he reneged on that. And then he talked about his foreign policy as well. And then he talked about the fact that he thinks that President Trump is being unfairly targeted by the news media and others. He said, I think the media have been harder on Trump than on any other president, certainly that I've known about, said Jimmy Carter. I think they feel free to claim that Trump is mentally deranged and everything else without hesitation. And I would add, without evidence. Now let's take a look at what's come out about Mueller. As the Hill points out, judging by his staffing choices, he may not be very interested in justice. And this is something that Jerome Corsi, again, has done a couple of articles talking about prosecutorial misconduct. And they start by saying, well, a lot has been written about his prosecutorial prowess. Well, we're going to tell you what somebody who was opposing him as a defense counselor has to say about it. But they say what was supposed to have been a search for Russia's cyberspace intrusions into our electoral politics is now morphed into a malevolent mission targeting friends, families, and colleagues of the president. That's right. A longtime friend and former counsel, Andrew Weissman, is one of these prosecutors that people are concerned about. As one person said in this article from The Hill, he's not just a tough prosecutor. Time after time, courts have reversed Weissman's most touted victories because of his tactics. They said this is hardly the stuff of a hero of the law. Weissman, as deputy and later director of the Enron task force, destroyed the venerable accounting firm of Arthur Andersen and its 85,000 jobs worldwide, only to be reversed several years later by a unanimous Supreme Court. Do you understand that? He threw under the bus a corporation that had 85,000 employees, and they got their reputation back years later by unanimous Supreme Court. Next, he creatively criminalized a business transaction between Merrill Lynch and Enron. 4 Merrill Lynch executives went to prison for as long as a year because of Weissman. Weissman's team made sure they did not even get bail. And we're going to talk to somebody later in the program in the third hour. We're going to talk to the wife of an individual who has been in jail without bail for 2 years because he tried to help a medical kidnapping victim who was removed from her parents. This is the way they operate. When they really want to get you, just as they do with the Bundys, they will keep you in jail for years before they even bring you to trial. Forget about the idea of a speedy trial. Forget about anything that has to do with due process, presumption of innocence, or anything else. And, of course, we saw this with Weissman doing that to Merrill Lynch executives who went to prison for a year. They didn't get bail. And his prosecution devastated the lives of those executives, cost enormous defense costs, unimaginable stress and torturous prison time, they write. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed the mass of the case, and he quietly resigned from the Enron task force, just as the judge prosecution began to excoriate his team, and as the press began to understand what he was really doing. So this is the kind of guy that Mueller has gone out to get. Bring me the man, I'll find the crime. But I think what was really interesting was the editorial that was put into the Boston paper, WGBH.org, by Silverglate. And this is a guy who works as a defense counselor. And I want to read when we come back, and then we'll go to our callers. I want to read what he said Mueller did with him in a couple of high-profile cases that who is involved in. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. Welcome back. And we're going to go to our callers here, and we've got some people who have called in about the Vegas shooting. And then we're going to get back to the individual who wrote an op-ed piece about his past experiences with Robert Mueller. He has a lot of issues with the constitutionality and the effectiveness of a special prosecution, but he has even more issues with Robert Mueller himself. But before we do that, because I've had him holding on here for a couple of segments, so let's go to Laura in California. Laura, you wanted to comment on the Vegas shooting. Go ahead. Laura in California, are you there?
Hey.
Hey, how you doing?
Hi, David. Pretty good.
Thank you for calling. Go ahead.
points, and the third one's the most important because I used to work in a coroner's office for 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the first point, briefly, is where are all the lawsuits? Only that one injured girl in the hospital filed one. Out of
That's right.
489 injured and the families of 58 killed, they only have one lawsuit. Isn't that odd?
And I've seen ads placed out by lawyers, begging for people to file lawsuits. So, yeah, that's interesting. We'll see what happens with that. Go ahead. That was the first point.
Yeah. The second point is, of course, related. I worked in the coroner's office for years. Suicide note. Where's the suicide note? Well, what are they afraid of? The handwriting expert to examine the handwriting? They don't want you to see it?
That's right.
Okay,
and they say that there was a note, but it wasn't a suicide note. They said it was ballistic calculations from a guy who was just spraying and praying. He wasn't a sniper. But they don't even show us the handwriting of that to know that that was his writing as well. Go ahead.
Right. And then the last point is everybody couldn't believe it when the FBI said that they chipped his brain out or his head out to be looked at or examined as to why he did this. Well, that has never happened in all the years I've ever worked in a coroner's office. Never. And
yes. I think that is absolutely amazing, too. To me, that shows how their case just doesn't have any credibility at all, that you have to examine the brain to find a motive. That's insanity. That's not the way that you conduct an investigation. As I said before, they started with a conclusion. They started with a story, and they don't want any questions asked about this. They're just trying to get the media to fill in the details and to put a foundation under this absurd story that they've got out there, and shipping the brain out to see if it's got a tumor or to see if there's anything else that they can see that would explain why he would do this. That's absolutely insane, isn't it? Right,
but that isn't why I called, because in working in the coroner's office, I've seen many forensic medical examiner diagrams. And when somebody is killed, they do these diagrams and they show the entrance and the exit of a bullet. So now, if you can imagine, let's just say Paddock was innocent somehow and he was struggling and there were some men holding him down. He's a big man, that guy. I've seen him. And I think that, if he was struggling, they couldn't get the angle quite right. So they may have had to send it out. Well, an entrance and an exit looked at by forensic experts would be able to determine whether he really did commit suicide or whether we're looking at a homicide. So
that's right.
It's an easy way to cover.
And as Lionel said, let's have let's have an investigation. Let's have some blood tests. Were there any drugs in his blood? What was the time of death? Can you ascertain that? We get absolutely nothing that you would typically see in an investigation. And I would say, Laura, why all of this secrecy when they tell us that, well, we know that it is only this individual. He's now dead. So why can't we all see the evidence that they presumably have out there? Because if they don't believe and they've ruled out anybody else being involved in this, then they don't need to keep anything secret in order to try to find any accomplices, right?
Right. Exactly. I agree with you totally. And I've looked at a lot of the videos. I wanted to call in and make my point about the entrance and the exit and the forensics evidence that isn't coming forward. And, of course, everything you mentioned about the CEO or the people that own the shares in MGM selling. And I even heard George Soros had, according to SEC revealings in August, had shorted MGM shares to the tune of 1.35 million shares. And I don't know, I didn't catch your show at the very beginning. But anyway, I just wanted to make that point, let somebody else talk now. But
well, those are excellent points. And as somebody... Thank you. Those are excellent points. As somebody who's worked for a coroner's office, that's exactly what we'd expect to see. I mean, why can't we see some real investigation as we typically would, even about the supposed suicide of this shooter? As she pointed out, that's Laura from California who worked at a coroner's office for quite some time. How about some information about the entrance and the exit wound? How about, as Lionel has mentioned in the past, let's see some blood tests. Let's see some information about the time of death. Instead, we get this absurd situation where they take his brain out and they send it somewhere looking for disease. That is how threadbare and how devoid of any motive they are, that they've got to go physically examine the brain to try to come up with some kind of a motive. They still don't have anything. Still don't have anything there. And yet this obstruction of justice, the interesting timing of how when most of the institutional investors are going deeper into MGM resorts, you've got people who are insiders who are selling off massive amounts, selling off 90%, the CEO, selling off 90% of his stock 3 weeks before. And of course, he is somebody who sits on Homeland Security's Infrastructure Advisory Committee as well. A lot of this stuff is very, very suspicious, and they ought to give us some answers. But of course, we don't expect to see any answers coming. I'm going to have the callers hang on through the break because I need to do a quick plug here before we go out. And again, if you haven't taken advantage of the sales that we have, some of those are going to be ending very quickly. Brain Force, 50% off. We have BioTrue Selenium, 40% off. We have Secret 12, our vitamin B12 formula. That is also 40% off. And Survival Shield X2, our nascent iodine, is also 40% off. And we have 20% off of Wake Up America. Just enter the code WAKEUP at checkout, and you can get 20% off of Wake Up America coffee. And that is in either the Patriot Blend or the Immune Support Blend. We really do thank you for your support. That's what keeps this operation going. All right, let's go to Sean in Tennessee. Sean, go ahead.
Hey, David. I just want to call in. You said on October 30th, they're supposed to be having a hearing to decide whether to investigate the Las Vegas shooting or stick with the official narrative. Am I correct when I heard
Well, no, actually, the October 30th hearing is going to be whether or not they're going to make a stay on destruction of evidence by MGM, whether they have now put an injunction saying you cannot destroy any evidence that you may have. They're going to have a hearing on October the 30th to see if that's going to be made permanent, because they've already had one individual who has filed a lawsuit. Others have not filed, as far as I know, but the attorney for that individual has. And so because of that, they want to preserve evidence. And that's the hearing that is coming up on October 30th. Hang on, we got to take a break, and we'll be right back to you, Sean. I'm David Knight, and this is Real News. We'll be right back on this October 23rd, 2017. Welcome back on this Monday, October 23rd, 2017. We were talking to Sean. He had some questions about the aftermath of the Vegas shooting. So I want to go back to him first. We also have some other callers that are on the line. Go ahead, Sean. What did you want to say about the shooting? We were talking about the fact that there was going to be a hearing coming up October the 30th. That was going to be a trial. That is going to be a trial to determine whether or not Mandalay Bay, MGM Resorts International, can destroy any evidence, or whether they're going to have to preserve that because of the possibility of lawsuits. Already one has been filed. We had a caller in the last segment saying she found it unusual that there's only been one individual who has filed a lawsuit. And that lawsuit was filed as soon as timeline version number 2 came out. And that was the one that reversed the Jesus Campos' security guard. He was supposedly the one who stopped the shooting. That was the first version of the timeline. Second version said, no, he was the first one shot, and he called it in, but they waited 6 minutes before the police to come, and then they came out after he disappeared. The sheriff came out and had a tearful press conference and said, no, you can really believe me now. It was only 40 seconds between the time that he was shot and the time they called the police. So he's going to take a hit because he doesn't want to get the casinos upset with him. But, Sean, you had a question about that. Go ahead.
I was first going to say, I think the evidence, you don't need to go much further to see that there's a cover-up and they're lying to us than Ellen DeGeneres' interview of Jesus.
Wasn't that something?
Oh, God. Like, before I even heard anyone say about it, and I just watched it myself, I saw a man, a security guard, who risked his life trying to stop killers. And he was sitting there, almost like he was scared.
Yeah.
And like he just didn't look right. And Ellen's like, "Oh, Mama Ellen's here. It's okay. Don't worry. You don't have to do any more interviews now. You'll be all right."
And it was interesting when he disappeared. You had MGM coming out and saying, "Don't worry. He's okay. He's going to be fine." You know. And the president of the union was very concerned about him. He said, I haven't heard anything about him for 5 days. And of course, that wasn't a question that Ellen asked. She didn't ask the question that was on everyone in the country's mind. Where have you been for the last 5 days? You had 5 interviews set up, and all of a sudden he just disappears for 5 days. And it was very amazing to me that the sheriff's office came out and said, he disappeared because he was afraid of Laura Loomer. It's like, are you kidding me? He was scheduled to go on and talk to on 5 interviews. One of them was Sean Hannity, but the rest of them with real reporters who were going to ask real questions. Why would he be afraid of one reporter who was asking him some questions? And of course, Ellen didn't ask anything about his personal life, which you would expect. I mean, here's a woman, Ellen, who's kind of an entertainer, and she does all of this kind of personality stuff. Wouldn't you think that she would ask him questions about his life and his background, and she would do kind of this human interest story type questions? Not even that. But of course, the question on everybody's mind, where have you been for the last 5 days? That was never asked. So it was a little dog and pony show where he could come out and repeat what they've now determined they're going to stick with, the story of the third timeline. And then she could shut it down and say, well, that's it. He's not going to have any more to say to anybody. So no questions about anything else. So your comment, Sean.
My comment is the kicker in all of it is the Ellen DeGeneres slot machine.
Yeah.
That brings it all to home. You look at that and it looks dirtier than even 9/11. 9/11 is pretty dirty. I guess you could call it conspiracy theory because it's a theory about a conspiracy. So sure. Yeah.
Well, we have a situation where, again, as I said, a real investigation is going to begin with questions. And the questions are going to be who had motive, who benefits from this, who had opportunity, so forth and so on. And then you're going to start to rule out things that aren't true, things that are not possible. Instead, what we've seen with this, with 9/11, with many of these other things, they start out with a narrative that is impossible, and then they rule out any questioning of that narrative. And if you question the narrative, then you're a conspiracy theorist. I mean, one of the issues with 9/11, of course, was how could 3 buildings fall straight into their footprint, just collapse like it was a demolition? These are steel skyscrapers, never happened before or since. And one of those was not even hit by an airplane. And so people would look at this and say, well, I don't really think that that's possible. And that's just one of many things that has come up over the years about that. But that's one of the most glaring incidents. But at the same time, you had a lot of insider trading going on with airlines, and we've seen the same type of thing going on with MGM. Clearly, this is something that is going to impact business. It has already impacted business in Las Vegas. And so that's one of the reasons they want to keep this localized to one hotel and one shooter. They want to try to minimize the impact on the region. And it's very suspicious, to my mind, that in a bullish market, where you've got most of the security analysts are very, very bullish on this particular stock, that the CEO is selling off 90% of the stock that he owns just 3 weeks before this all happened. So all of that, I think, looks very suspicious as we're going along. And if they don't give people any answers, and if they don't give any credibility to the eyewitnesses who said, well, we saw something happening here and we saw something happening over there. I had an individual who contacted me by email. I'm still trying to see if he will get the person that he talked to as a relative of his who was a police investigator. And he poured cold water on the idea that there was anything going on with any of this stuff until he went to Vegas on a vacation and he started asking people. And he said everybody he asked in the hotels were convinced and had seen things that were additional shooters. And so it really turned it around for him. And that's the issue. You have to investigate, and you have to make a sincere effort to find the truth. And we can all see, and Ellen is the prime example of that they're not interested in getting to the bottom of anything. They just want to sell us a story and move on. That's it. Just move along now. Don't ask any more questions. Anything else you want to say, Sean, before I get to Monica?
I guess just a small plug. DNA Force, it works. I hope you guys get some more soon. Great.
Yes, that's something that I take on a regular basis. Thank you, Sean, for that plug. That is what supports our operation. Thank you very much. Let's go to Monica in Washington. You also want to comment on Vegas. Go ahead, Monica.
Good morning, David. Thanks for taking my call. You're my favorite host there.
Well, thank you.
I do have a Vegas question, but I wanted to make a quick rave on the Secret 12, if I may.
Sure.
I call it BuzzFeed the sequel. And I love this product. I've been getting it for several months. It does give energy, but it also calms the nervous system and heals the nervous system if you have anxiety, for stress, etc. And so when I find something I love, I share it with my friends, and which I did, sharing it with another nurse friend of mine. And she said, well, I wouldn't buy any of that snake oil if I was you. And I said, well, she said, let me show you what I use. And I said, okay. So she comes back into the room with her bottle. And lo and behold, because Alex mentioned several times that you guys private label, and she was taking the very same thing.
There you go.
The same thing with a different label. So
that's right. Yeah, because she doesn't.
And
Yeah, but because Infowars sells it, she thinks that it's snake oil, but it's exactly the same thing. Thank you for sharing that. And of course, it's methylcobalamin, and it's the same thing that you're going to get if you take vitamin B12 injections, except you can take it orally, and it's great. And so your nurse friend is taking the same thing, and but she's okay because she's not buying it from Infowars. That's the important thing to her. We got to take a quick break, Monica. We didn't get to what you had to say, but we'll get to you right as soon as we come back. Thank you for sharing that about Secret 12, and of course, you can get that right now, 40% off. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight, and we'll take your phone calls on Vegas, on the Mueller special prosecutor, and we've got more to tell you about Robert Mueller when we come back. Also, if you want to jump in about Congresswoman Frederica Wilson and her hat selection, we'll take calls about that as well. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're taking phone calls. Most of the people seem to be interested in Vegas, but if you would like to talk about our rhinestone cowgirl Congresswoman, Frederica Wilson, you're welcome to do that. We're going to play some clips about her that came out since last Friday. Also, if you want to talk about the witch hunt and the new evidence that's come out about Robert Mueller, actually, I haven't even gone over what we were told about Robert Mueller by Harvey Silvergate. Haven't talked about his past experience with him, but there's been a lot that has come out in the last week or so by Jerome Corsi and others talking about prosecutorial misconduct of the people that he has brought in as part of his investigation team. And Harvey Silverglate also talks about the issue of a special prosecutor and the flaws that are inherent in that. So we're going to get to that in the next hour. Also coming up in the third hour, we're going to be talking to the wife of an individual who has been in jail without bail for nearly 2 years because he came to the defense of a young girl who was medically kidnapped. And we're going to tell you what happened and how this is not an isolated incident and how over the top this particular prosecution is, and of course, how you can help as well. But let's get back to Monica, who was talking to us before we went to break about the Vegas shooting. Go ahead, Monica in Washington. You had more that you wanted to say about the Vegas shooting. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, David. So it was after the last press, if you even want to call it a press conference, that the sheriff gave. It was the one after Laura Loomer had asked him about the room service receipts. Was that do I have it correct? Is that that's the last
I think so.
one
That indicated that he had checked in earlier than they had originally said in the timeline, yes.
And, of course, he shut her right down. And then on the following one, when he took no questions and he was just very, and he kept saying, our narrative, don't question our narrative, no conspiracies, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I kept thinking about these receipts and the room service. And do you think that, of course, there's so many disturbing aspects with this, but what do you think about the maid or whoever sending the maid up with the guns in the room service carts, because they're draped on every side. Who knows, right?
Well, we don't know. I mean, the interesting thing, too, about that was remember that Steve Wynn, who owns a Vegas casino as well, had gone on Sunday show with Chris Wallace and had said it would raise flags with us if an individual had a do not disturb sign on for several days. We would have investigated it, even for the safety of that particular guest, to make sure they hadn't had some kind of a health incident. But I find it interesting that they didn't do that. And then he says, and of course, we would never let anybody use our service elevator. And Chris Wallace says, wait a minute, are you saying that this guy used the service elevator? And he, oh, no, I'm not saying that. And then he goes back to that other story again. But then it came out a couple of days later that, yeah, he had used the service elevator. So there's a lot of stuff that is very, very questionable about this. And in addition to the fact that the narrative is constantly changing, a lot of the stuff doesn't make any sense. And here's the thing, Monica, I think when we look at this, and even Ann Coulter, who doesn't get into questioning the government's official stories on these types of shootings. I've never seen her do that before. But even Ann Coulter came out and said, well, there's a lot of stuff that's really suspicious about this. The idea that this guy is a multimillionaire by playing video poker, where you're going to lose a penny off of every dollar that you spend, you're going to lose a penny on average. That's just phony to start with. But then we look at the other stuff, the fact that he had gloves on and so forth. And she says, well, if I was writing a movie script, I might say that this, and this happened, and that would be more plausible than to go with the narrative that they've given us. So she basically looks at a lot of different issues that they have and then says, well, I might say that maybe there was some kind of a gun trade deal going on, that maybe he was part of some kind of a gun running scam or something, and people found out about it and they used it to shoot from that room. And then, put the gloves on and shot him. So she says, I don't have any proof for that, but I'm just saying that would make more sense than the garbage that we've been told. And that's the point, is that we don't have to come up with an answer as to what happened. That's their responsibility. What we have been given is a continually morphing and changing narrative that doesn't hold water, that is not possible. And so they need to start giving us some answers. It's not incumbent upon me to say, well, it was ISIS, or it was the FBI working with ISIS, or it was the FBI and the ATF doing some kind of a fast and furious false flag operation, or that this guy was a lone shooter, whatever. I just know that what they're telling me doesn't make sense. And we can see that there is an obvious cover-up, especially by MGM, working with Ellen DeGeneres and other issues. That's why I started with a Follow the Money story earlier today. We know there's a lot of stuff that really stinks about this. And that's what we need to know. We need to say, look, your story doesn't make any sense. You don't have a motive. And sending the brain around to try to find a motive, that is patently absurd. How about giving us some truth and some transparency for a change? Because you're telling us that this is all set up and it was this individual and now he's dead. So why can't we have some answers, right? Right, Monica? What do you think?
Yes. Well, and we see it in real time right in front of us. Unlike 9/11, where, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have people recording and can go back and in retrospect and say, how about that? But now it's just unfolding right in front of us. But
Yes.
no, we're supposed to just, take it and not question. And I just think it's such a shame, David. And my family and I have had wonderful times in Vegas, such good memories. And this is so horrible. And I don't know. I don't think you or anyone knows if we're ever gonna get to the bottom of it. Will we have to wait 50 years to have records unsealed? I mean, it's just...
Yeah, till we get something from
ridiculous.
WikiLeaks or something. Yeah. Well, they're having issues, and I think part of the secrecy here is that they just want this to go away as quickly as possible. They want to sweep anything that might incriminate them from a legal standpoint. They want to sweep that under the rug. But I think by ignoring eyewitness accounts and shutting them down and by giving us multiple false timelines and so forth, I think what they're doing is they're making people, I think it's going to have the effect of making people more afraid of Vegas, because they're saying something is happening there. And they're not, this is not an honest investigation for whatever reason. And I think it's simply going to heighten people's concern about safety at Vegas if they're not transparent, if they're not truthful with people. I think it's going to come down and have just the opposite effect that they hope it would have. But thank you so much, Monica, for calling. I want to move on to Shane in Ohio because we don't have too much more time left in the segment. Go ahead, Shane.
Hey, David.
Hey, how you doing?
This is what I took from the L&M Campos interview.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like everybody missed it, but he said the only thing that he said that he wasn't led by Ellen. The only thing he said was he wanted to give thanks to all of the first responders, including the FBI. The FBI was first responders? What was they already doing? They was already there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I guess. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I caught that. I caught that, and nobody had said it. And also what I wanted to say about the sheriff, when the sheriff gave that last interview, last press conference or whatever, he said, does everybody understand that 959? Does everybody understand that? And as soon as somebody said something, he asked a question. When somebody went to ask a question, no question, sir. No question.
Mm-hmm.
But he just asked a question. Do we all understand? And somebody obviously didn't understand.
But he's not going to explain anything. Yeah, ask me no questions, I'll tell you no lies. But that's a good point. And the question to me also, and maybe there's a reasonable explanation for this, is, as you point out, why is the FBI involved so early? Or even why is the FBI involved? Because they've ruled out terrorism, right? They're not saying this is a terrorist attack. So why is the FBI involved in this? Why are they running this investigation? Why are they confiscating people's cell phones and removing evidence from their cell phones? I mean, it's the FBI that's doing that. Your comment, Shane.
It's all. I think that no matter what, as long as all of the independent journalists and Infowars keep asking questions, eventually they're going to have to answer us, or we're going to find it out.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, there's a lot of people, I think a lot of eyewitnesses who recorded stuff. And I think that over time, we're going to get these people to come out and they're going to talk and they're going to give us the video footage and we're going to see what's happening with that. We've already had a lot of people doing a forensic analysis on the audio to say, hey, we think there were multiple shooters and here's why we think there were multiple shooters. We're not getting that kind of factual investigation. We're not getting any information, as a matter of fact. Instead, we get this hokey nonsense. Let's send his brain around to examine it for motives. Like I tweeted out, I said, what are we, back to 19th century phrenology now? Saying that we're going to be able to ascertain criminal tendencies based on certain types of physical lumps in the head. It's nearly that bad. They're saying, well, we're looking for tumors, but it's about that bad. It's absurd. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We got news at the top of the hour.